Hi, hey, hello. Welcome to Power to the Purple. If this is your first workshop webcast with us, thanks for joining. This one should be interesting. If you are a repeat player, again, welcome. I'm glad you guys came back. It makes these fun and interesting to have people to actually kind of interact with and not just me talking to the endless void of space that is my webcam. And yep, as Elaine had said, slides and recording will all be sent afterwards, so no problem with that. Let us know if you need time with the labs. We can, yep, there you go. Help you guys get in and make sure you get the most out of it. With that in mind, we'll do the quick intros and then we will get running. We're going to go back and forth. This is a little bit of a different format. The original kind of intro to purple teaming was kind of light. We wanted to get away from that. We're sure you guys have seen that before. You've done it. So we kept some of those concepts and we merged them together with a little more red team style efforts, some more blue team stuff to really make this holistic and give you guys a good dive into purple teaming, especially if this is your first time. So there's going to be a lot of hands-on stuff to do here. There are a lot of slides, but me and Tyler will move quickly. That way you guys have the most time as possible to play. If you haven't already, go ahead and click your VLP link. Let the lab start spinning up because it can take some time depending on how it feels like acting. It might take 2 minutes. It might take 10. That's just the nature of the beast. So go ahead, click that link, and let's get this thing started. So who am I? I am Trey. I am our lead AE over here and the head of SCYTHE Labs. My background is really varied, 15 plus years in the field. I've done everything from being a SOC analyst and consultant and threat hunting to red teaming, working in ICS and OT. I've been a formal educator. I've developed a lot of content in other places, kind of like on Hack the Box Academy. Some of that courseware was me. I'm a lifelong learner, and if you care about alphabet soup, I've got a list of them down there, and there's a few more that I don't really think matter, but I have them. If you want to find me, you want to interact, chat, say hi, or just add me, Twitter and LinkedIn are down there.
Yeah, hi everybody. I am Tyler Casey. I have about 10 years of experience doing DCO, defensive cyber operations. Currently, I run the blue or defensive side of our purple team engagements, and I'm responsible for a lot of the emulations that we put out through our Empower service. Prior to coming on to SCYTHE, I was on a CPT, which is a cyber protection team, where we deployed internationally for incident response and targeted threat hunting operations. And then I have my socials up there too if anybody wants to connect. My Twitter is mostly St. Louis sports and activities, but if that's your thing, hop on in.
It is cool to see. I will say that. It keeps me more involved. All right, so here we go. What are we covering today? We're going to talk Purple 101. What is purple teaming? The whole basis around it, how it kind of works. Then we'll move into threat emulation. We're going to talk about how to kind of determine what a threat is to you, how to correlate that data, the information you need to start developing emulation plans and actually go about doing it. From there, we'll move into hunt and detection, looking at the blue side of purple teaming, where we'll talk about some good ways of correlating data, what you should be looking for, ways to kind of probe these engagements and probe purple teaming to get it moving forward from the blue perspective. And then we will wrap this up with a quick talk about operationalized purple team. What happens when we put all of this together? How does it look? How do we report, determine metrics, all of that fun stuff. At the end of the slide deck, we'll have a bunch of extra little like tips and resources and things for you. So you guys will have that to check out later as well. So what is purple teaming? Anybody have a good definition there for this? Give it a few seconds. So that was enough awkward silence there. Yep, a collab of red and blue. There you go, Dustin. Thank you. So working together as offense and defense to inform both sides. Exactly, Andrew. We've all graduated from some form of school at some point. So we've seen the color wheel. We know red plus blue equals purple, right? In the end, that's really what's happening. We're taking all of our red team concepts and pulling it out of the vacuum that it typically operates in and doing the same with blue team, bringing our analysts, everyone together, pulling them out of their vacuum or silo and just mashing it together. But thinking broader on this topic, purple teaming is realistically a collaborative and milestone driven exercise is what we're talking about here. We're bringing everyone together, we're working together, we're collaborating, and we're making sure that we're meeting the metrics, whatever they happen to be for that exercise. It might be determining security gaps, it might be testing some new mitigations or security integrations you've put in place. It could be anything as long as you've got some form of goal to reach. We're really defining our criteria here when we're thinking about purple teaming. This is a little more narrowed in scope compared to red teaming or threat emulation, however you want to think about it. We're pulling this in, kind of putting blinders on to everything else and focusing on what we're trying to accomplish as a team. So with that in mind, we're going to talk a little bit about testing maturity for a minute. Over here on the left, we've got vulnerability scanning assessments, things like that. That's kind of the beginning stages of really developing your security program, right? These are all the things that you're required to do. There's always some kind of compliance requirement for them. And it's the typical what we think about when we think security, right? Pen testing kind of falls into that end of it. As you mature as an organization and in your security programs, we start leaning more towards the adversarial emulation red teaming side, start looking at potential physical stuff like that. But it's for really, really mature teams. It's for organizations that have already knocked off all the low-hanging fruit, validated it, and now they're trying to go that next step and really take security on as a culture. For purple teaming, we kind of fall here in the middle. We're not quite in the beginning phase of this all, but we're not quite in that super mature realm either. This is a good place for us to test and validate those baselines, what we have going on, right? And we can do this also by adding that threat flavor into the mix. We can, as an organization, determine what we feel is a risk or a threat to us, what would likely target us, what that would look like, and test against it to see how our defenses stack up. That's really where we're going here when we think about maturity, when we think about purple teaming, and where this kind of falls in the whole spectrum. So why would you purple team? So the biggest one, if anything, there's a takeaway here of training defenders. Most of the time in a pen test red team, your defenders aren't involved. They're not really allowed to participate or kind of be in the mix. They just kind of play the, was that the red team? No, I don't know. And they go about their day. They either get it validated or they do incident response until someone tells them to flag off and go do something else. You can help improve these processes between your teams. Maybe you've got an internal red and blue team, or maybe you're just trying to improve the process between your analysts and your people that are building detections and doing that whole process. Because a lot of times if you're working in a blue cell, those roles might be split, right? You might have a sole focus of all you're doing is closing tickets. You might be a part of the help desk, or you might be actually developing detections or doing all of these other different little features and functions. So by bringing in this purple team methodology, you can bring everyone together and really improve the process and the communications between these groups, because they all have to work together at some point. It's just a matter of how and how much have you practice it. Next thing down here, so security is defined by the threat. And in reality, it doesn't matter what you can think of or what your wildest dream of what potential risk is, it is just potential risk, especially if you know there is a broader, bigger threat to your organization. So by taking that threat, keeping it in mind, you can really start driving this vulnerability management process, driving the way your security operations work, what you're looking for, and how you're defending against it. And last but not least, really the part that I think is worth it here is that showing immediate value. From a purple team perspective, it's not the red team does their thing, throws a 40-page report at you, and it sits on the shelf for another year. It adds more work to your analyst plate. They've already got a full-time job. So when are they going to get to it, right? But doing this in the collaborative in a purple perspective, you can in real time see an issue and fix an issue working together. You're building lines of communication, you're building real-time fixes to your security posture and your environment, and it's overall good for everyone. It shows you found something wrong, you fixed the said thing that was wrong, and all is well. So when thinking about purple team and testing and what we're doing, where do we go from here? Sunil Yu has this cool cyber defense matrix that's out there that kind of helps explain what we're looking for and where we're at. From those beginning stages, when we look at this, so the 5 operational functions determined by NIST, right, from left to right: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. As you're setting that baseline and foundation and trying to understand what you have what you are as an organization, what you need to protect. That's kind of left of boom, right? That's our structural awareness. We're thinking about our assets. We're thinking about the applications we have. Do we have inventories for everything? Do we understand what traffic and things look like in our environment? Once we understand those things, we can get right of boom into the detection, respond, and recover phases. From here, this is where we can really start doing the job. This is where we focus on the purple teaming side. We're not here to do asset inventories. We're here for the detections. Does that stuff work? How do we respond? How are we recovering from an incident? All of that stuff matters here. Now, you'll notice down at the bottom of this slide here that that left of boom function is really focused on technology with a little bit of that process flavor. Right of boom, we're really focused on our people, our processes, how we do things, who's doing it, making sure everyone knows their role. That's the kind of stuff that really matters here. And this is the side we will focus on more when we think about purple teaming. So I've said purple teaming probably 30 times in the last 10 minutes, but what does a purple team really flow? What does it look like? While I'm going, so Elaine's asking a question here for you guys. Does anyone else need a lab link if you're not following chat? Did everyone get one? Are we good? Cool. Yeah, if you did not, let us know in chat or send Elaine a message so we can make sure you get set up. So who all's involved? What's that flow look like? What are we doing? From a purple team exercise perspective, you have your exercise coordinators, your red teams, your blue teams. This can often include your SOC analyst, your detection engineers, maybe it's a battle captain, watch officer, those kind of people are all coming together to really make sure that you understand what your threat looks like. You're presenting that threat to everyone, determining what you're going to emulate from that threat and test against. Red team goes, builds their emulation plan, executes, and then blue team attends to hunt it, find it, detect it, and see if they didn't detect it, find out why. Now, this isn't happening in silos. You're not walking away and coming back and saying, I did a thing. Real time, you want to be focused on building that trust and that collaborative effort, right? So odds are you're sharing screens or you're in the same room together, showing, hey, these are the behaviors, the TTPs we did. Here's how we did it. Here's what you should see. They talk, discuss, everyone gets together, and blue team then flips the script. They share their screens. They actively look through logs. They're looking at their defensive tooling. They're checking the AV and EDR. They're checking their SIEM. Did we get logs? Did we get alerts? Did something happen? If yes, cool, we got to win, right? If no, well, why? How do we fix that? Let's go hunt it. Let's go find it. Build new detections, maybe add new policies, put something in place to help shore that gap. And then this process itself is iterative. We're going to do this in a cycle and keep doing it as we test new behaviors, new tactics. Maybe we're testing against different threat styles. And this is really just a cyclical process. That's a really hard word to say, everybody. But yeah, so that is the exercise flow in a nutshell. It's nothing crazy. It's just a lot of doing a thing, looking for a thing, doing a thing, looking for a thing, back and forth. So thinking about this, let's dig a little deeper on purple teaming. What are the variables we can control when it comes to these exercises? It's a lot like when you think about a pen test, that kind of an engagement, right? You can control the scope, the complexity, the frequency of how they happens. With these three variables, typically scope, it's where is it happening? What can I poke at? It can be one PC in a lab environment. Maybe you've got a direct mirror of what prod looks like. Test against there. And we've seen a lot of people do this. This is a great way to start establishing trust and making sure you're not going to go into production, break the environment, or mess stuff up with your testing. So maybe you load all your defensive tools onto a little lab host, you run the engagement against that, show that it works, show nothing's going to break, and slowly, gradually build up the scope of your testing to include more hosts, different business units, maybe fully into production. You can grow over time. You don't have to go 0 to 100 overnight and test everything. So complexity, this one, and for lack of a better word, is a very complex thing to think about. With the complexity of our testing, there's a lot to take into account. Are we trying to be convenient, or are we trying to go for realism? And what I mean by that is there's a lot of testing tools and methodologies out there, things like Atomic Red Team, that can help you do one-off testing, test an individual tactic or behavior. And it's in the name, atomics, right? Small, bite-sized pieces, testing individual things. And that's a great starting point. It's really convenient when you're a fledgling team, or maybe you don't have a red capability inherently built into your personnel. But what you're getting for convenience, you're starting to lack in realism. These are very loud, very noisy tests. Typically, your threats aren't going to work on a one behavior kind of test, right? They're going to do things in tandem, in chains. They've got a dedicated process. So you lose a bit of that realism from doing it this way. But it does help build trust and confidence and build support for this kind of testing style. As you start growing in competency and maybe adding red teamers to your team, stuff like that, you can really start shifting the gear towards the realism spectrum, using more stealthy tooling, developing larger threat emulation plans, maybe running full kill chains instead of just a couple different behaviors to test against, and grow over time. The last piece of this, frequency. How often is it going to happen? Are you the kind of organization that maybe you test once a year because it's required annually? Do you test quarterly, monthly? We've seen it plenty of different ways. We know organizations that they'll do their annual pen test once a year for insurance reasons. We know others that are doing weekly testing where their teams are coming together for like a little lunch and learn. They run a small kill chain or a couple behaviors to test some new detections, things like that. And from there, they move on. They validated some stuff works. They maybe found some new flaws. Come around next week, they test again, see what's going on, see what's new. So it's really a matter of what can you as a team handle? Do you have the time and availability for everyone? And we get it. You have day jobs too. You can't just be testing forever, right? As much as we would love to purple team forever, all day, every day for a job. I mean, Tyler and I are fortunate enough here to be able to do that. But not everybody has that, right? You've got your analyst job. Maybe you've got to build some new detections, or you've got to work with policy. You have other stuff to do. So make sure you're picking a frequency that you guys can support. And this really comes down to habit building, right? If you do it once, it was cool. If you can keep going, if you can make it frequency, if you can set a schedule, get into that real heartbeat, this will become a real part of your culture as an organization. So what's in scope? Got this back up again real quick. We're going to talk about scope a little more. We're defining what we're doing. We're looking at where's the overlap, where are the gaps, and what protections do I have in place with these. So we might have defensive measures put in place that's monitoring and watching the applications that are in use, the devices our personnel use. Maybe you've got some kind of DLP in place, things like that, but you've got no real network telemetry or monitoring of users and how they access intellectual property in your devices. Those could be very clear gaps and things you need to think about and test against to validate. And that's what purple teaming is perfect for. What overlap in those security tooling do I have? Do those controls have a way to be fine-tuned to maybe cover more of this whole spread image? And also, what business objectives can be impacted by that gap? What's really important to us as an organization? It could be really cool that you've got awesome device inventory and you've got it locked down. People can't do anything with it. They can't boot properly, or not properly, but like boot into another operating system or to a flash drive, something like that. But if they're really just using them as kiosks or like a Chromebook as a hypervisor access, does all of that truly matter for you as an organization? Thinking about what's important for you from your security posture is really going to help determine and drive scope. So the BAM, we bring this one up in every workshop we do because this is a really cool way to think about it from a threat perspective if you're trying to map a kill chain. Left of this line we see here, or left of BAM, you've got all the traditional phases when you think about kill chain, where the threat's doing their reconnaissance, they're poking and prodding, they're looking at open source information about your organization, all these other things where you can't really control, right? And the interesting part about this is they're looking for weaknesses. They're looking for data leakage. They're looking for how can they find a hole? How can they take advantage of something, whether that's a people, your process, or your procedure, or your equipment, the way you do things to find a way in. It's really hard to do anything about this because it's out of your control. To do business, you have to put information out in the world, right? You can't say you do this crazy thing and then not tell anybody what it is. When we think about this, a really good analogy here is, let's say it's your house, your home, right? A guy walking down the street is just that. It's a guy walking down the street. Now, maybe he's got some malicious intention and he's casing out your house. He can look around, see what kind of locks you have on the door, what your windows look like. If you've got dogs, things like that, right? Maybe there's an ADT sign in your yard. That's cool. That's all information they can glean just by passing by. There's no direct interaction, things like that. Not much you can do about someone just passing by. The next level, as we get to that line itself, that initial access, that breach itself is just that. It's initial access. And this is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. This access, it's been gained, but nothing's really happened. And we can tie this to that same guy walking down the street. Now maybe he picked the lock on your door, or he found an open window and just opened it. Has he really done anything? Has he stolen your goods? Has he kicked your dog? Like, no, he's just opened a door. And that's really what locks are for, right? They just keep honest people honest. But from this perspective, the thief's there, maybe he got in, he has yet to do anything. To the right of this breach, where the true actions are going to happen, where that impact to your organization is going to happen, is afterwards. So these effects, maybe they're disabling alarms, cutting power, maybe they break into your safe, steal your stuff, take your dog food, whatever it happens to be that they did in your house, graffiti the walls, who knows? That's what really matters. That's what's going to affect you. That initial access didn't affect anything. It just proved there was a hole. We still don't know about that, especially when it comes to thinking about it from a virtual perspective. 0 days. These things are happening all the time, right? I swear I'm seeing alerts from SCYTHE 4 or 5 times a day popping up for something new. So there's always going to be a way in. There's always going to be some kind of vulnerability. A lot of that is still out of your control. What you can control is what they can do once they get in, what they have access to, and how you can see these things. You might monitor the outside of your house, but are you monitoring inside? What's going on there? Do you know if someone was able to get in? Would you be able to tell? And that's what we're really focusing on when we go through this and we think about the scope. How do we control our environment? How do we ensure that if someone gets in, they have as little control or ability as possible? And how do we detect and respond to someone actually being in our environment, in our organization? How can we minimize that dwell time, and stop those actions? So with that in mind, here at SCYTHE, what we kind of preach and what we really believe in is we go with the assumed breach model, because again, that initial access, that breach that's going to happen, maybe there's a new vulnerability in your firewall that's remote code execution, or someone managed to get a web shell on one of your forward-facing web apps, or your OA portal was left open to the world for some reason. Who knows? Someone's eventually going to get access. So why waste time from a engagement or from a testing perspective waiting for a user to get phished, waiting for someone to find a way in or develop a new 0-day or bug? That stuff is expensive. It costs time, it costs money and effort. And there's no guarantee that it's going to happen in your 24 to 40 hour testing window, right? There's no real guarantee that someone's going to click a link or that something new is going to pop up. So you can avoid all of that, which is kind of out of your control anyway. You know it's going to happen. You just need that proper controls in place. Move to the assumed breach scenario. The threat got in. Now what are they doing? This helps with the cost. This could be something like you've simulated phishing emails happen, things like that, and just move on and start actually testing against threat behaviors and TTPs and all of this fun stuff. We want to make sure that we get the most value out of our time and our efforts doing this. And in reality, those controls you put in place, especially at your boundary, true APT style threats, the way they work, the way they operate, they're low and slow, they're methodical. They're going to find a way in. It's a matter of time. So focus on what you can control. So quick break here. If you have not already clicked your lab link already, this is another chance. Go ahead, open it up, spin it up, and take a moment to get familiarized with VLP and what's going on in there. The navigation can be funky. They just updated the UI again. So what you're going to see on the second page of the lab manual is no longer valid. That needs updated, but it's quick and easy to move around. And if you have any questions or concerns there, we're only going to take about 5 minutes or so to do this. Make sure you're up and good. If there's a problem, let us know in chat, okay? I know I just talked for a good 25 minutes straight there. I feel like I need to catch a breath. Has anyone had problems so far with getting VLP started? Guess not. All right, mine. Come up. Correct. So while we're going, I'll go ahead and get mine to load up too. Make sure everything is good.
Hey, Dustin, see you in the chat there. For this part, it's really just the first 2 pages in the manual that's in there just to make sure that everybody's up and that everything loads and just kind of get you set to look at it. And then going forward, we're going to start talking about threat emulation. We're going to deploy some threats. We're going to hunt on those threats. We're going to find some CTI. We're going to talk about the Purple Team framework. Yeah, got a lot of stuff coming up. I think one of the big takeaways from Trey's first part he was saying is don't mess with his dog. Threw about 4 dog acronyms in there.
It's been one of those days. I had puppy training earlier. I got a new little pit bull, and he's a handful, so it's on my mind.
Mm-hmm. You're like they might come in and steal your dog food. I was like, oh man, you better watch out.
I was trying to think of something absurd. I don't know.
No,
Cool. So I guess while we're going on, we can follow along together. I'm going to click through real quick and show you where some of the stuff is inside VLP. I guess the ones you guys would really care about, once you get to this screen here, you can click into the console itself, or you can come up here to the little keyboard shortcut. Click this to send the Control-Alt-Delete into the hypervisor. You access this initial host with the username and password of Unicorn, and then it'll come up and do its thing. As it's going, if you don't like this kind of a look here, maybe you don't like the window tile, you can collapse the manual. These 2 arrows right here will make it smaller and go away, so you get a bigger resolution. If you want to see it, what's coming back, you just click the same 2 arrows up here for collapse and expand of that panel. From this up here, again, let's talk about this top nav bar. You got your timer that's in place here. You got this button that says finish lab. Be careful when you click this. You'll have 2 options here for exit and end. If something happens, you have to hop off. Maybe you've got another meeting like someone was saying they do earlier. Click exit. This will close the lab environment, spin everything down, but it will not kill it. So you'll be able to come back in and finish it later and finish off the time. If you get through this whole thing, you're done by the time this workshop's over with, and you can hit end. End will completely tear the lab down. You will no longer be able to access it. So those are the 2 major differences there, okay? From the buttons, this is just kind of showing you your connection to the VLP hypervisor. You got a little full screen. Everybody's seen that before. You can provide console actions this way, so refreshing and resetting the VM, maybe it goes weird. Keyboard shortcuts, if you have any notes on the console, they'll be here. And then this one will come in handy. Sorry, never mind, saw something pop up in chat. Then this last one is send text to console. This one will come in super handy here if you want to copy and paste things in and out of the environment. You would take some text, drop it here, hit send, and whatever you're clicked into, whether that's a browser or a text document, it'll send the text there, okay? Over on this side, you've got resources, the consoles, and the manual in here. Manual is simply that. You've got the arrows to click through back and forth. Or if you want to move around, jump around, see what's there, the little hamburger stack will take you to a table of contents. If you click this, you can collapse and expand these to see what's in each little piece of it and how you want to look through it. Just click on something, it'll take you straight to the page. This one takes you all the way to the beginning, this one will take you to the end, and the others help you sift through it. On consoles, this is all of the hosts in the lab environment you currently have access to. Okay, hey Elaine, those are going to everyone. It looks like to hosts and panelists, not just to the person you were talking to.
Okay.
Sorry about that. On the console side, this is everything you'll have access to. You don't really need to hop around. I think there's maybe one point you might hop over to Slingshot, I want to say. But other than that, they're just kind of there as the back end to help support the lab and the behaviors and things we have you guys do. From the resources in here, you can grab a CPE printout for the end of this workshop so you can submit those for your hours. We know everybody needs CPEs, right? But that's really what there is and what's going on in here. Almost everything we do for the lab from this point forward will be from this Unicorn host and from the Chrome web browser. So as we click in, you'll see we've got a bunch of saved links for you already. The ones that you'll really need for the coming up sections is going to be the logins for Covenant and Starkiller and Splunk for sure. So that's realistically VLP in a nutshell. Before we move on, do you guys have any other questions, comments, concerns?
Trey, there's no way I can just message the person.
Oh, okay. No, that's fine. That's
You
actually
don't
my
have to.
mistake. I thought that said everyone, and I just realized it's host and panelist. You're fine. All right. Well, if there are no questions, we will get on the move. I want to get through these slides so you guys can have the most fun playing. Feel free while we're going through the slides and stuff to poke around in the workshop. There's plenty for you guys to do. By no means do you have to follow this to the T. If you want to dive right in, you can. But
Trey, on that too, before you go on, if anybody does want to hop into the lab and go ahead, you'll see on, I believe it's page on page 4, we're doing kind of like a choose your own class. We have 4 different threats for you to run on there. So you can feel free to go ahead and run one of them or all of them, any of them. We want this to be a little different, everybody to have more of like a dynamic experience. So if you go ahead, feel free to run whatever labs you want to do.
cool. So let's start talking from the red side, threat emulation. So what is it? Realistically, we're taking red teaming and combining it with factual knowledge, with the known behaviors, known bad, things like that. The way we do our operations, the kind of capabilities we want to emulate, and really what we're trying to accomplish. Blending it together, that's giving us this ability to take that CTI, to take our potential threats, and really craft and create our testing against them and determine how we would shape up against it. If you want a more official answer or a proper sounding definition, so security test using adversary emulation to help identify your gaps, verify defensive assumptions, and really prioritize your resources and time, right? We consider that like data-driven red teaming. That's what we're talking about here. But what does that all really mean? So we're taking this knowledge that we've known, whether it's stuff we've collected as an organization personally or that we've gotten through open source resources, and using that and what we know of how these threats potentially operate to build realistic security testings that we can utilize. We're doing this to help really improve our defenses by emulating those real world cyber threat behaviors. Think of this as a more targeted approach to testing. It's not just throwing the book, loading up every potential BOF testing tool X, Y, and Z and throwing it at our environment. We're being realistic, we're being targeted in our approach and making sure that we're getting the most bang for our buck. What is it not? It's not pen testing. This is not the same. It's not an opportunity for you to wreak havoc against your environment or against your blue team. You're working collaborative, you're working together. The end goal is to make everybody stronger, right? To improve our defensive posture, to ensure our organization can continue to conduct business. That's the end goal. We're not just trying to own domain admin, dance on a DC, or password spray and lock out all of our users and then step away saying, hey, we found some problems, you should fix that. We're really trying to be realistic. And lastly, this is not the time and place to go and grab that new CVE unless you're a really mature team and you understand where you're at already. Don't go grab new proof of concept exploits for vulnerabilities and just chuck them in your network. You don't know what they're going to do. You don't know what the potential impact is to business operations. So it's not really the time to test. What are the core components when we think about threat emulation, or this red piece of the purple team concept? The 5 key components here that we think about is defining our threats. So what is likely a threat to us and what are we really afraid of? What does a bad day of business look like for us if something were to happen? Gathering that intelligence, is there any historic reporting for our potential threat that we've identified? Is there anything we've seen in-house that we could utilize to retest against? Then there's the capability development portion of this. So taking all of that information, putting it together into some kind of threat emulation plan and ensuring that we have the tools and capabilities to emulate those behaviors. Building all of that up so that we can put it to work and actually test against the threats that we've perceived. This could be in the form of a tabletop exercise. This could be actual running commands on keyboard like you guys will do in today's lab. This could be a mixture of both. It's really up to you as an organization how you want to do this. And then lastly, what everything needs, it's debrief and improve, right? The end goal here is to improve, to help. If we're not documenting our findings, if we're not documenting our fix actions and understanding what's going on, what did we really do? We've got to be able to, I mean, even from a purely business and time is money perspective, we've got to be able to show that what we did had some kind of impact or validated something, right? Where's the value in it? And that's what we're going to try to show here. As we move into this, we're going to talk a little bit, we're going to switch up real fast. We'll talk about the defining our threat and gathering intelligence piece. We're going to talk about the CTI, some cool ways and places you guys can find it, how to define what a threat looks like for you, stuff like that. So from here, I think this is a switch over to you, Tyler. I'm going to take it.
Yes, it is. All right, let me get mine loaded up. All right, you see it all right?
Yes, sir.
Fantastic. Okay, so we're going to give Trey a little break. I'm going to talk for a little bit. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is defining our threat. So when you define your threat, you want to, or when doing threat emulation, you want to find a threat that is likely to attack you, or like the most realistic type of threat that you can have. So to do that, you need to look at capability, opportunity, and hostile intent. So who has the capability? The defensive complexity will make the level of the threat you face rise. So what that means is if you have very, very thorough defense in depth, you have a lot of boundary tools, you have great detections, you're going to meet a higher level of adversary, if that makes sense. And then from that, you need to look at who has the opportunity. This we can control a little bit more through layered security, patching, solid controls, and things like that to kind of reduce that threat landscape. Then we're going to look at who has hostile intent, whether that be an insider threat, competitor, criminals, nation state threat, hacktivism, whatever. So by combining capability, opportunity, and hostile intent, we have our holistic threat landscape. And then knowing intent is really important. So by knowing the intent of the adversaries and what they might be after for your business, it allows you to focus more on what adversaries you want to study and what emulations or what adversaries you want to emulate in your testing or in your emulations. And then a better, maybe more fun way to say it is this slide that Trey really loves. So you can look at an exploit is like a type of capability. A vulnerability is an opportunity, and a threat or a risk is the likelihood when you combine it with human intent. So in this, the threat actor or threat is the threat actor or someone who wants to punch you in the face, right? So what is the threat of that? The threat of that is a punch being thrown. The vulnerability that you have is your inability to defend against that punch. And then the risk is the likelihood of you getting punched in the face. So if you put all those together, what's up?
Hit next slide, Tyler. It didn't switch on you.
Oh no. Which one am I on now then?
It's still showing defining our threat. The first one.
What is going on? Let me reshare. Sorry, everybody. Which one do you see now?
Go. The one you were just on. That works.
The defining the threat. Okay, that makes more sense. Let me notes up real quick. Okay. So yeah, a more kind of realistic way to look at it is like this, right? So your threat actor, someone who wants to someone who wants to punch you in the face, someone who wants into your network, into your business, onto your endpoints, whatever. The threat is them punching you, them getting in. The vulnerability is your inability to defend against that punch, and then the risk is the likelihood of getting punched in the face.
It's a much more interesting way to talk about it.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with my slide. Sorry, everybody. All right. So then, again, in threat emulation, we want to look at what we have in the terminal. What do we have that an adversary may want? So we know what we can focus on, what we need to defend, what type of adversary emulations or adversary attacks do we need to emulate to better protect ourselves. So to help build this picture out a little more, we're going to look at ourselves and determine who would care about us. So to do that first, we can look at what do we care about? Is it intellectual property? Is it PII? Is it PHI? Customer information? What do we have that they might want? And then the next thing is, do we conduct business in a contested region or in a region that's often targeted by a specific threat? So if we're located in America, are we hit a lot by China, by Russia, by Iran, things like that. So you can focus by region on who may attack you for who you will want to emulate. And then what is our market? Industrial, financial, medical, ICS, critical infrastructure, etc. We want to align our threat, our adversarial emulations to what affects us. So if we're in an industrial market, we might want to focus on ransomware or something like that. So you want to find an actor that typically will do like ransomware type actions or typically go against your market. And then, are we already being targeted? Have we already seen some reconnaissance? Do we see in the proxy logs or on the edge devices, do we see somebody trying to recon our environment? Do we already know who is after us? Can we emulate them to better protect ourselves in the long run? And then at the end of the day, the new hotness is always something to worry about. So whether it was Log4j last year, all the Okta stuff, the Citrix stuff, all those 0 days that Trey was talking about earlier, that's something that we need to be concerned with as well. As new things pop up, it only takes a few days before you see something on Twitter or X, and then 2 or 3 days later, you see a proof of concept for educational purposes, and everybody who has access to GitHub is able to pull down that POC and run it against anybody. It couldn't have been more than 6 hours after Log4j was announced that we were seeing that URL string in our edge routers and in our proxy logs, right? And then you want to focus on what's your worst nightmare. So at the end of the day, you're trying to protect your business, your company, you're responsible for it. So if your worst nightmare is ransomware, you want to create emulations for that. If your worst nightmare is lateral movement or just destruction, defacement, something like that, you want to focus on what's important to you. And that'll be different for every organization based off of leadership, your risk appetite, things like that. All right, so now that we answer those questions, we can start to scope in on the threats that we want to emulate. Again, this will provide us with a better impact because we're going to emulate threats that we are most likely to see. And that's what we want. We want this to be as real as possible. Again, who might care? Who might want to attack us? They could be going for espionage, cybercrime, hacktivism. You need to look introspectively at what your organization does, things that they put out, and who might want to attack them. Hacktivism, I did an exercise last year with Dominion Energy for Cyber Fortress, where their big thing is hacktivism, right? They're an oil gas company, they're a power company. People have a problem with that, so you want to align to what your threats are, so you can better protect yourself in the long run. Which, if you're playing if you're playing Power to the Purple Bingo, I think that's the 5th time I've said that, so you can mark that off on your sheet. All right, so now that we kind of know, we've looked in, we know who might want to attack us, who based off region or what we put out there, what we think is important. Now we need to go in and gather some intelligence on those groups so we can develop the threat. So there's different types of cyber intelligence. This is David Bianco's Pyramid of Pain. It's been out for a while. Typically, we refer to this in like detection engineering, but it also applies to threat emulation. So we want to focus on TTPs and tools. Those are the hardest for adversaries to change, and it'll provide the most realistic emulations for us. The lower part, the artifacts, domains, IP addresses, hash values, those are pretty trivial to change, right? I mean, to change a domain, you just go DigitalOcean, AWS, GCP, whatever, you stand up a new one. I mean, you go to GoDaddy and register a new name. Those are not difficult for them to change. And a lot of those will be caught by your vendor tools anyway. There's Yara signatures, there's IOCs for that. All the EDRs are constantly fed that through your CTI, through your cyber intelligence. So we're not going to focus on those. We're going to focus on the TTPs, the tools, the behaviors of the adversary, what's hardest for them to change.
I mean, that's a really good note there, Tyler, too. If you're having to dive into the bottom layers of this pyramid, say into the artifacts or IP address, allow listing, block listing, and hash values, you probably need to reevaluate your security tools, because this is the kind of stuff that's almost automatically updated and should be covered. There's no reason you should be having to dive that deep.
For sure. I mean, even if you're just running, the free version of Snort that you get after 30 days, that's going to catch most of this stuff anyway, right? So you really want to focus on that top level, the things that are hardest for them to change, and therefore they will likely be what they're using for a longer amount of time. I think it's a different course that Trey talks about this, but they talk about like 2 APTs 10 years apart that are still doing the same thing 10 years later. It's what works, and they're not going to change it if they don't have to. But this brings us to the next slide. We're going to talk about tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs. So down there at the base level, we have tactics. Think of that as like the big picture. What does the threat actor need? So in this example, the threat actor is trying to gain credential access. Then up a level to the technique, that's where they're going to get what they need. So they need credential access. How are they going to get it? They're going to get it in this example through an LSAS memory dump, right? And then at the top, we're looking at procedures. How can they get what they need? So they need credential access. They're going to do it through credential dumping, through dumping the LSAS memory process. And then the procedure of how they're going to do it is they're going to run proc dump, LSAS, and then get the actual dump itself. So in this, we could see kind of like bottom to top of thinking of what do I need? What can I use to do it? And then how exactly am I going to do it? So it's just another way to think. If you're thinking of it like kind of at a 1,000-yard view, and then down in closer and closer of how you can build your threat emulations. So then finally, looking at some actual actionable CTI. See, the one on the left is not super great, not super helpful, right? On the left, it's kind of broad. Doesn't list any actual commands that they run. It doesn't have any of the MITRE cheat codes in there. It just kind of like broadly talks about what happens. And then on the right, we see it's getting a little bit better. We have some tactics that are listed. We have a little more information on what they're doing, but it's still not great. They list on there that they are going to enumerate system info using to find host name, host configuration, IP addresses, whatever. It's like, okay, that's great, but how exactly are they going to do it? It's really what we're looking for. So here, this is kind of our best case scenario, right? So we have specific commands that an adversary has been observed running in the wild, and we can take these and emulate them to have a more like one-for-one of what an adversary is doing. So we can provide the realist, that's funny to say. We can provide the most likely, the most authentic adversary emulation that's possible. And then if it's in a list like this, that's great, right? That's just copy paste. You can just run that right in there, import it into your platform. But oftentimes it looks a little more like this, where you're going to have to go in and extract the TTPs and extract what they're doing out of a report or something like that. So although this is going to take a little more work to go through and kind of ascertain more of the TTPs, it's it's full of information, right? We have what software they're running. We see PowerSploit. We see that they're running PowerShell. We have some IP addresses, some C2. We see that they're trying to do the credential dumping. They have Mimikatz in there. So using this kind of hits all parts of that pyramid of pain, right? So this is also a pretty good bit of CTI to go through. Just takes a little bit of work to kind of dig down into the TTPs itself.
Yeah, well, it's nice here because it's giving you the kind of the golden ticket, you know, what they were using, but it's also giving you that context of why, right? So we're really hitting that what, how, and why kind of scenario with this paragraph.
For sure, for sure. And then so we talked about CTI, but where do you find it? These are what we use to find CTI. The picture that it has there is of InfoSec Ninja's start.me page. It is great. It's got all of these CTI repositories, I guess you could say, all on one page. It's updated constantly. It's up to date. It's easy to see. It's absolutely wonderful. But another great place to find CTI is from CISA. They put out awesome stuff. They have like scripts of what they've observed in the wild. They have the commands. They're really good. They come with IOC. Sometimes they have detections built into it. So I would highly recommend checking out CISA. The DFIR report is also a great one. They have a lot of insight into threat actors. They have great reporting. Their maps are really great and easy to follow. So I'd recommend them. Google Tag, which is the threat analysis group, they have great reporting. And then a little thing called MITRE ATT&CK. You guys probably never heard of it. It's pretty small, new company. No, the MITRE ATT&CK is kind of the holy grail of InfoSec and threat emulation. They have so many resources there. It is, a treasure trove of info as well as other detection tools. And then these will all be available when you guys get the slides there at the end, but you should be able to just Google these and be able to find them. All right, and that takes us to the hurdles. I think, Trey, that's back to you. Trey, can you hear me? Oh.
Of course, I'm talking on mute.
I say you're on mute. I was like, I can kind of see your mouth moving, but
I love that button. So when thinking about CTI and developing our threats and what we're trying to actually operate against or test ourselves against, some of the hurdles we're going to face would be, realistically, there's not CTI for all parts of every threat actor's kill chain, right? Or for the potential emulation plan we want to build. This stuff in all reality is likely historically dated data. It's stuff that came out 6 months, a year, 2 years after the fact. It's not directly being released as the incidents are happening or as it's being investigated. A lot of the times this information is kind of kept under wraps until the whole incident response piece ends and it's gone through legal proceedings, all that kind of stuff's happened. Then they get the permission to release it. So by the time we find out about it, there might be missing pieces, or it may not really represent that threat actor's current capabilities. So these are the things we have to keep in mind as potential hurdles. These old TTPs, they may not work in your more modern environment, and vice versa. Maybe you're working with legacy equipment. Some of the TTPs you're seeing from your potential threat might not work on those hosts. So with all of these different little things or potential hurdles, we've got to be able to stay creative. This is where we start talking emulation, not simulation. So we're trying to make sure that we can get as close as possible, keeping to that realism, but also shifting and making sure that our plans work for our capabilities and our environment. So we found all of that good stuff. Now what? What do we do with it, right? We need to develop a plan, and we need to do this in a way that's going to be an easy to interpret format, not just by the people building it, but by those you're going to be presenting it to, those that you're going to be collaborating and interacting with on the blue and the red side. Everyone needs to know what's going on. We've got to be able to correlate it from the procedures to the tagging to understand what is it that we're doing, why are we doing it, and why would we care, and make sure that we're documenting down, say, the perceived or reported procedure to the action we're going to emulate. Like we said, it may not always be the same. We might have to get a little inventive or creative. Sometimes reporting is just bad. You might know that they do credential harvesting, but you don't know how. So you just insert your own little piece to emulate that particular portion of the kill chain or that overall threat scenario. We're really just trying to emphasize here over the last 2 slides to keep in mind that creativity is a big win in this field, in the whole concept of purple teaming. We want to make sure that we can continue to grow and move forward, because even if you're not doing a direct one-for-one simulation against what you perceive as a threat or your worst day, you're going to get close. And in reality, that's the stuff they can change up. You can change behaviors, you can change procedures over time. So you testing against something slightly different is overall still a good thing. So we can do all of that. How do we document it? That's our question, right? We have this framework called the Purple Team Exercise Framework. This is public and open on GitHub, and this is our way of doing that. The PTEF is a really comprehensive document that defines what purple teaming is, how to go about running an exercise, all of the stakeholders, people that need to be involved, and really how you go about the process. Within the PTEF, specifically in section 6 and 8, I want to believe, there's a bunch of cool samples and document templates that you can utilize to go through and correlate all of the CTI that we've gathered and put it into an actionable format. And it's really good for helping you build ad hoc exercises. It's really good for giving a clear way to express what you're trying to show with that emulation plan. At a minimum, if you take nothing else away from this workshop today, go check out this resource. It's on GitHub, it's free. It's there for your use. And we are pushing an update to it here soon. Hopefully it'll be out around beginning of summer or so. So there'll be some really cool new templates added and just an overall kind of refresh and cleanup. It's been a little bit. It's still very much valid, still works though. Just a quick example of what that can kind of look like when trying to map your TTPs to this template. So we provide a generic example of, so taking that CTI source, what is it? What's the tactic, techniques, procedure codes? What are the actual tactics, techniques, and procedures? How do you plan to emulate it? Are you automating it as you get more advanced in your capabilities? And then what are the potential detection and prevention opportunities? By filling out the majority of this, you have a good idea of what your exercise looks like already. And from here, it's just letting it rip, run, see what happens, and taking notes to see whether something worked or it didn't and how you can fix things. And I mean, documentation is key for everything, right? It's showing the value of what you did, but it's also helping you improve your purple teaming process or your threat emulation process as a whole. So another quick little like summarized example of ways you would build out the overall plan. This would be something you would expect the exercise controller or that EA kind of person to present overall to the group. What it would look like, a quick description of the threat you're trying to emulate, how they do C2, execution, all of those normal attack code things you would typically see, right? Putting it in some kind of similar format like this is a quick, easy way to get that information out of there, let people know what you're going to test, but you're not giving away the keys to the kingdom. Because another part of this whole realism and purple teaming and testing is we want to see how our teams organically react. We don't want the gamisms of like pen testing that you typically see where people are like, oh, that's just the red team, we're going to leave that alone and ignore it. You actually want them to hunt, to investigate, to test their processes and procedures, not just did the tooling detect a thing. So that takes us to our first big lab. We are going to let you guys go here for a while. I know I've got 20 minutes marked here on the slide, but we'll probably go a little longer. This first chunk of PTEF, of course, my enrollment knocks me back out because I ran my mouth too long. But this first chunk here up to slide.
So I think it's slide 19.
Yep. So all the way through to slide 19 in the manual, we'll walk you through a quick scenario, you can pick one of the threads we've had. From there, you'll build out an actual emulation plan. All of the documents and stuff needed to run through this should be in the desktop and documents folder of the Unicorn host. So you can find that information there. You can find the templates there. Feel free to take a look at the resources and go through the lab. We'll do a quick recap and move forward here in 20, 25 minutes or so. As always, if you've got questions, concerns, something's not working right, let us know in chat. Everybody doing okay with the lab parts so far? I know this good chunk's a little bit of researching and having fun with that, learning some new tools. Anybody got any questions so far? Anything pop up? Now, keep in mind through this section, you don't have to research and document each one of those threats. Just pick whichever one sounds the most interesting to you and run with that one. Here in a few more minutes, we'll probably do a quick demonstration of what that would look like with documenting some TTPs and mapping the flow. All right. If you guys are still working in this section of the lab, feel free to keep going. We're going to jump in here for a bit and do some quick little demos so you can kind of see as we go through it if you're kind of stuck in decision paralysis, you know?
All right. Yeah, so I'm just going to go in and just kind of demo a little bit of this for APT 41. So here we built out a little bit of a threat profile. This is one of the community threats or standard threats that we have. So APT 41 is a sophisticated Chinese threat actor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. They go by these different aliases. They typically target the US, UK, Germany, South Korea, Japan, Kenya, Taiwan, and they target these industries. On the timer I had set up for the course is going off. Ooh. And then the objectives are normally most Chinese APTs are aligned with the Chinese state-sponsored activities, so they're kind of like offensive agents for China, I guess is a way to put it. So they look a lot for espionage, intellectual property theft, and targeted intrusion efforts. And we have some references down there at the bottom. So some of these references I pulled up here. I'm just going to kind of go through them and we'll talk about a bit of the CTI like we were before. So I have, go to the top, APT 41 also goes by these names. As we scroll through what they have here on MITRE, we see that it's like a mix between that really great CTI that we were talking about earlier when we had the two pictures up. And so it's like a mix between the really, really good one and the not so great one that kind of talks about overall intentions, or kind of like a broad way of talking about it. So we can see that they use some net commands. They're adding user accounts. It's got a little bit of where they downloaded payloads from, so the C2. So we have a bit of a mix here between like word for word copy paste threat emulation that we can do, and also some more broad stuff that we could maybe interpret and change based off of kind of what you're going for. We see a registry key, and as we go down to a bunch of that through the different tactics and techniques, see some more commands. This ping sweep is pretty neat. Software they utilize, and just some more references. So we get a good mix on here of some good TTPs and direct commands that we could execute to try to emulate them. But well, let's try another one. So let's go into the Mandiant one under here. I already kind of scrolled through these, and then here we see this scheduled task change. So this one is pretty neat, because on the MITRE one, if you search for the word change, it's got like just a chunk of that, just the first two. So you can see like a bit of it here, and as the more CTI you look at, they'll even like reference each other. But we see that this on the Mandiant page is likely that full command that was ran. So this is something that we're really looking for. You could just copy paste this out. It's exactly what the adversary is doing, and will give you the most realistic emulation. So there's a bunch of those in here under the Mandiant. I normally would just have a notepad doc, and I would just copy paste those out, especially the ones that are word for word copy paste exactly as it is. And then going over again, we go into this CrowdStrike report, which also is like a bit of both. They have a lot of really good, see here, like how MITRE was referencing that it uses net commands and net stop. You see here in the CrowdStrike report that it's got those specific commands, which again are more than likely what you're looking for, right? So like APT 41, that was how we would go through the process of gathering some intelligence from those to then be able to make a realistic emulation that we would deploy and do a purple team off of. And then it's a similar for Hive, Fin13, Cold River Spica. That one's really interesting. That's a new one for you to look at. And then we reference here this PTEF example documentation, which is from the slides. The image gets a little cut off when you expand it in this platform, but basically it's just like going through and pulling out the actionable intelligence, how you would emulate it, how you would automatically emulate it. We'll get more into that. We have a whole nother section on the PTEF itself. And then we'll go some more into those CTI resources that we were talking about earlier in the slides. So the main one that I pulled out here is, again, this start.me page from InfoSec Ninja. It's really great. I can't say enough good things about it. Trey and I use it probably every day, if not several times a week at least. And it's got a little pew pew map here, which is great to have up on your TV and your sock. Everybody likes that when they're walking through with the leadership. But from here, you could just click on new things are constantly updated, get new information if you're looking for emulations that you want to do, and like maybe you don't have a specific target or you're just looking for the new hotness or something like that. You could just go in here. It's done by time. You could pull out new stuff. It's really great. And then also honorable mention, SCYTHE. Use this one all the time. This is a great report that has a ton of actionable intelligence. So it starts off kind of broad in there, and as you go down, they have great diagrams. They have the exact commands and tools and C2 that they utilize. It's clickable to expand into, oh, my camera's a little blurry. It's clickable so you can expand into other references that they have. It's really great. They do a great job. It's free. What else can you say? You know, it goes through APT map. You can click on building that outline. And then I'm going to go into the creating our first threat emulation plan. So this threat emulation plan is based off of the SCYTHE advisory that I have up here. You can see if you click on that image, we filled out the first chunk of that PTEF CSV, right, or table. So we have the source, the tactic, technique, procedure, and then how we would emulate that in our environment. So you see the procedures are pretty broad. They're not specific to what exactly they're doing, like copy and paste. That's more where you get into the emulation procedure. So if you are able to just copy and paste directly from the CTI of what they're doing, like what's observed in the wild, that's really optimally what you're going for. But if you can't, you just kind of do the best you can and try to make it as closely aligned to what you see as possible. And then from that plan, a way that we like to visualize the attacks or the threats or the campaigns is to use this MITRE. I'm drawing a blank on what it's called. The attack flow, the MITRE attack flow. So in here you can create actions, processes, domain names, IP addresses, and/or statement. You can have notes, files, hashes, whatever. It's a full anything that can go in a sticks document is able to be portrayed here. So when we do our threats, we like to map them out on here because it makes it a lot easier to visualize what's happening, and it's a lot easier to kind of flow through. It's also really great if in like a planning perspective, because as you're mapping them on here, you can kind of see what's missing. It's like even if you run these as like a tabletop or something like that, it's a great visualization for it. I would highly recommend that you guys use it. And then that takes us into get Trey.
I was say if you're someone like me where you're more visually minded, like reading through and looking at lists to try and do a thing is hard for me. But if I can draw out a picture, it just makes sense. So using something like attack flow or some kind of mind mapping tool is a great way to show the emulation plan or show what you're trying to document and do.
Yeah.
The one thing I did want to give an honorable mention here real quick. Can you click back on the MITRE tab you had?
Yeah.
I know we skimmed over talking about it for a minute in the slides, but if you've never seen this before, the MITRE ATT&CK framework has new pages over in the CTI section for groups. If you've got no real like Intel analyst or like any kind of CTI program at all with your organization, and you're trying to start doing these kind of threat emulations, this is a great place to start. Into the groups tab, it tells you all kinds of information about a ton of different actors already. They've got them mapped out for APTs, ransomware groups, crimeware, all kinds of other things. They give you descriptions of each different threat. They tell you what kind of markets or realms that they target. And they give historic examples in both documentation and the TTPs they use, and overall what they're targeting and what their behaviors are. So if you're looking for a quick, easy route to build a threat emulation program overnight, this is where I would start. The MITRE ATT&CK groups page and what they have built there is awesome.
Yeah, For sure. Totally agree. Can't say enough great things about MITRE. I mean, having all the stuff up there publicly accessible, they have like 9,000 different sub programs. It's absolutely fantastic. Then those take us into our challenge questions. So does anybody have any answers for these? We have described the steps you would take to perform recon on a target organization without using automated tools. Anybody have any ideas on that? All right. Everybody's doing that. Trey, you're the red team expert. What do you say for that?
So this is one of those things where it's a very open-ended question. And well, what do we mean by reconnaissance on a target organization without using automated tools?
Mhm.
Are we digging through the Googles, looking just to see what kind of press releases they put out? Are we digging through social media? And then on that kind of a perspective, if we're not talking about like the open source recon and looking at the external facing attack surface and everything they have, and we're talking about like internal recon steps, this could be a lot of things. This could be the use of the net commands. This could be the use of just built-in tools, sysinternals, all kinds of different stuff, share hunting. There's so many different steps. And honestly, the best place to start would be what you have on the page right now. Going into the matrices, checking out the discovery and reconnaissance command sections, and seeing what fits with what your intel is showing.
Yeah, for sure. Saying Chandra sent us a message saying OSINT, just like succinctly wrapping up what you're saying. I couldn't agree more. There's so much out there just on the internet, going on LinkedIn and seeing, oh, they have some job openings for what? Oh, for some Fortinet devices that this company employs. Like, okay, well, they probably use that technology. You can begin to target based off just what is available publicly. That takes us to our next one. If you can demonstrate how you would manually escalate privileges on a compromised system. Does anybody have any ideas on how you do that?
So a good one here that may not apply to one of the four scenarios we picked. Maybe you started deep diving off on your own. A real quick one I could think of would be something like utilizing PSExec. A lot of times it's a feature, not a bug built into it. When you execute stuff, whether against a remote host or locally against the same host you're on with PSExec, it'll likely elevate you into a high privilege context. So that's one quick way I would go about it from a manual perspective.
For sure.
And it's relatively low profile when you think about it, because the tool may or may not already exist in your environment, depending on your system administrators, or you can pull it live from the cloud.
It's signed by Microsoft. You could just mount it right there in the cloud. Yeah, for sure. That's definitely a great tool, just mounting the sysinternal suite. And then we have when you would use a manual intervention versus an automated penetration testing process. It's like some ideas on that. It's like you might want to do some things in an automated sense, like maybe gather credentials or doing something like that, and then kind of pause and then manually go in and use those credentials that you've exploited to do further actions. Like you might need a tactical pause in your engagement or in your emulations to process and gather other info, like that LSAS dump we were talking about a while ago. Maybe you want to pull that back, crack it offline, and then go back into the engagement, into the adversary emulations and pull that out. Then we have a comment here from Mohammed for leveraging insecure services with high privs. Yeah, for looking at service paths and things like that. If you find a vulnerable service, you can go in and exploit that to elevate permissions. Sure, that makes a ton of sense.
And that kind of ties back into the first question too there. Well, if I can find some juicy creds hiding out in a text file somewhere, or maybe in a share, or maybe some Git documentation that's checked out or something, there's all kinds of different ways we could do this stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Back to the first question, because you mentioned the Git in one of the holiday hack fest that Sans puts on. They had, I think in the first one that we did, they had that same scenario where they had a Git repo that was supposed to be private that had hard-coded credentials in it, and you had to go through and basically grep that whole repository to find the credentials, then use that to log in. So yeah, that's totally a viable way to do it.
Yeah, I think I remember that one. It ended up being in the commits.
Yeah, yeah. They thought they deleted it, but they didn't, and there it is. It was an S3 bucket out there, open for everybody. Not to get derailed from what we're talking about here, but yeah,
Squirrel.
yeah, for real. Then the last one we have is how can you ensure that the threat emulation scenarios accurately reflect tactics, techniques, and procedures? For that, I think I think we hit on it a bunch of times. You want to be as close to what is reported and seen in the wild in real life as possible, right? And you want to stay up to date on it. You want to constantly check for the CTI to pull the new tactics and techniques that they're using. But I think the main point there is you really just want to be as realistic as possible as you're aligned with your adversary.
Did anybody have any questions, comments, concerns over this first chunk of the lab sections? This was probably the longest piece from us speaking wise. Everything from here should be pretty short of hearing us run our mouths and a lot more time for you guys to play.
Yes. CTI will help. Yes, of course. Yeah. Just relying on that CTI and just being as realistic as possible is really just the best way to do it, right? But I'll ahead and stop sharing my screen in the lab so we can get back into it and continue on.
All right. So we've talked through the basics of what purple teaming is, how it flows, how it works, all of that fun stuff. We talked through the beginning phases of the red side and a little bit more of the purple on developing what we think our threats are, how to find good CTI and document it, all of that fun stuff. Now we're going to get into a little bit more of the exciting part of this, the capability development and actually executing our plan piece. Man, shouldn't have drank that Red Bull earlier. So one thing I want people to keep in mind, you don't have to be a rock star red team to do purple teaming. You don't need to have APT capabilities overnight at the start of your program to do this effectively. Oftentimes, you don't even really need that kind of capability. Starting small, basic procedures will take you a long way, and we're going to talk through that a bit and how to develop. So some of the capabilities you would need to consider when thinking holistically of what this program could look like. Stage 0, so when you think about how are you getting initial access, what kind of payloads are you using, the stagers that you're going to utilize for that, down to things like the infrastructure, how you're doing command and control. And from there, the stuff that truly, really matters from this perspective of a purple team, thinking about the post-exploitation piece. What kind of payloads are you using? Are you using your own custom-built tools? Are you bringing in tools and scripts from the web? Are you making new persistence pieces? What all do you have going on? It's a lot to consider. It's a lot to think about, but it's doable. It's just a matter of time, effort, and money. What do you want to put towards it? And this goes back to that realism versus convenience talk that we were discussing earlier today. You can accomplish a lot of this stuff using free and open source tools, but you also kind of get what you pay for. And a lot of times there's not a lot of flexibility or help and documentation for those tools. On the flip side, paid tools, things like Cobalt Strike, stuff like that, are rather difficult. They've got a learning curve and they cost a ton of money, not to mention the availability of training. So from both ends of the spectrum, it's kind of hard to go about this. Now, if you decide you want to go the tool route and use like an altogether kind of piece, that choice of testing tool does matter because you're looking for a bunch of different things, right? You're looking for some realism. Can you inject that into your process? Flexibility in how those tools operate and the behaviors you can emulate and perform. Can you replay those behaviors? Are you able to collaborate with a team? Is it just a one-person user interface? And then probably the most beneficial thing I would think of it all is that reliability and trustworthiness. This is stuff you're looking for, right? You want to make sure that it's not going to nuke systems or take down your network or do things you didn't ask it to do. Because in the end, we're trying to improve, not tear stuff down. This is kind of where the SCYTHE platform can come into play here. This is something we wanted to talk about. Obviously, you're at a SCYTHE workshop, so we really wanted to talk and show off our platform for you for a minute. All of those nice little features and functions we just talked about when it came to reliability, flexibility, trustworthiness, all that kind of stuff, we've built those capabilities into this platform for you. And from the red perspective, everything you could potentially look for to conduct a purple team exercise is baked in for you. And it's to a point that we've made it as easy as possible to generate threat emulations, execute those emulations, and document the goods and the bads. And I mean, Tyler, you're a really good testament to this, right? Before you had joined our team, you had never really done this kind of stuff before, and now you're cruising through PTEs.
Yeah, I was only really a red teamer on paper and never more of a blue side. It was super easy to get going and start, and now I feel like I've been using it for forever.
It hasn't been that long. But our platform can really help you jumpstart that threat emulation capability if this is something you're looking for. We've got tons of pre-existing threats that we have built up in our library, stuff you could utilize to emulate. So it solves that issue of you having to take the time and effort of finding them already. The modules we have built in, so like our invoke both modules, the discovers, the say persistence or elevation modules, they help perform a lot of those really difficult tests that have a hard learning curve from a red perspective. And we've made it to where you click a button, you insert some variables, and it does it for you. So you can kind of skip that big piece of the learning curve, I guess you could say. And you're really able to emulate these threat actors or these perceived threats with a relatively low learning curve. So all of the things we had just talked about, if this is something you're thinking about, something you're looking at, keep us in mind. So like I was saying at the beginning of this section, you don't have to be an APT style threat actor overnight. If this is something you're trying to get off the ground, you're trying to develop that culture of security and that trust within your leadership to allow you to continue doing these things before you start picking up big fancy tools, you can start simple, going through doing things, just executing commands through PowerShell on a host or the command prompt overnight is a super easy way to do an action and then see if you can see the action in your logs or if it alerts. It can be as simple as that. You don't need to go crazy. And that's just what this slide is showing. I put some examples up here for you of, hey, just build a quick socket. This you could do, really anyone could do, especially with the use of modern like LLMs, like things like ChatGPT or Find. Ask it to make you a command real quick and it'll spit it out and boom, there you go. You've got some behaviors you can play. As you grow over time, as your needs increase, you really start knocking those low-hanging fruits off the table when it comes to your security posture and the things you're trying to defend against. Your red capabilities are going to want to increase. So you'll start thinking about new tools, maybe paid or free, things like that. You're going to get to play with a few today here in the lab. So it should be interesting to see what you guys think about those. So emulating those adversary capabilities. How are we mapping those adversary capabilities to something we're going to emulate? And what we're talking about here specifically is thinking about maybe the tools they're using. Sometimes they're custom building stuff in-house. Their stuff never gets released or investigated, so you never catch a copy of it, see it pop up in the wild. If those aren't available, is there some form of tool that could emulate and do a similar thing? So a good example here would be, do we need to do, let's say, LSAS dumping using like say Mimikatz or some other tool or something in Metasploit, or is there some other way for us to do it? Keeping in mind those things will help you stay flexible, will help you improve the way you do these threat emulation plans and the capabilities you as a team have. It won't hurt to deviate in these instances. And realistically, what it comes down to is if they're doing something that's super secret sauce, can you show it a similar way? Can you do something different? Can you do a variation of that same technique? And if you've got the time, if you've got the budget, you could build your own capabilities. But that's one of those things everyone's kind of hurting on right now at this point. So last few ones, taking action as you're actually executing and doing this whole threat emulation piece, it's okay to do something as simple as utilizing RDP or using free and open source frameworks for command and control. Threat actors are doing this stuff all of the time. I mean, how many of the recent reports have you seen where they've said they've used some kind of RDP client, whether it's a free one or it's something already in the customers or that organization? I said customer, should have said victim, but something already built into their environment that they just took advantage of. These threat actors are doing a ton of living off the land and using what's there. So why wouldn't you when you're trying to emulate them, right? We want to be methodical. We want to follow our kill chain. We don't have to be super complex. Being complex, doing super cool red team stuff doesn't always make for a great test. If it's flying so far over the heads of your defenders, did you really help? Were you able to improve the way they do things, or did you just prove that it's one more thing they can't see and you currently don't have the maturity in your security program to even attempt to detect those things? So what it boils down to in the end, stay within scope, try and follow your plan as close to it as possible, but be willing to be flexible and have fun with it realistically. As I'm going through these things, as I'm taking these actions, I like to insert conversation into the PTEs as well. Maybe just asking a set and series of probing questions. It could be something like, do all of your analysts know the plan currently? If an incident pops up, who gets alerted first? How does the reporting process look? Does everyone know the role they play when an incident is reported and deemed necessary to respond to? And then that could be something as little as, do you have documentation that's up to date? Does everyone know what tools you're using? Do they know what the workflow looks like when an alert pops up for something happening? There's a bunch of different factors that come into play when you're trying to emulate a threat and drive a purple team exercise. You're there to help the blue side grow as well, so you should be reinforcing those procedures and things that they're supposed to be doing. This is just another quick example of probing questions, things you could say or ask to move this simulation along or emulation along and really get them involved in thinking about what they're doing. And this last one is me, someone totally not famous. This really came to mind. I was thinking about it for a while, thinking about threat emulation and my red team background and how a lot of people got really stuck around using new cool tools, big expensive tools, all kinds of crazy actions. And they were getting so rigid and distracted by the threats they were trying to emulate that they forgot that that's also our job, that they could be one themselves. You can be creative. You can change the way you do things. Don't be so stuck and rigid in what you're doing that you can't see an open vulnerability. You built a plan, you developed a scope, yes, but there's nothing saying you can't go back and say, hey, I see this potential issue over here. I know this wasn't in our desired scope, but are we willing to test this and experiment and see what happens and try it? The threat actors, they're not going to follow a set of rules or guidelines. So we have to be willing to flex and test things that we notice as we're going through our engagements as well. So with all of this in mind, we've got a fun little chunk of this lab built for you here. You're going to get a chance to play with Atomic Red Team, some of these tools we've been talking about. You're going to launch some Atomic Red Team tests. We've got Empire and Star Killer set up in the environment for you guys to utilize. This is a free C2 framework that's out there currently that does a really cool job of emulating a lot of threat actor functions. Think of it as kind of like a Cobalt Strike style framework, but it's, I would say, in my opinion, a little easier to use. And the price tag is a lot less steep. Lastly, we'll end this lab section with playing with SCYTHE. You're going to get a chance to hop in, look through the threat catalog, build your own threat emulation plans based on the intel you just collected and documented, and execute some threats against the target host that you have. We've got a timer down here for saying, say, 30, 45 minutes. We'll be flexible with that. We'll probably hop in here at the 20-minute mark or so and demo as you guys are continuing to play. So this will take you through to, man, this enrollment timeout is getting me. So from slide 20, probably to 32. So yeah, those are the chunks we're going to work through. If you have questions, as always, pop up, let us know, and we will continue on. How's everyone feeling about the content so far? We made this one a little longer and put some more information in here, but we wanted you guys to really get a chance to see and play and use the tools and do the process, not just hear us talk about the process.
Trey, if you're talking to us, you're on mute. I saw that mouth. Saw your mouth moving. I didn't know if it was Gus the dog coming back.
Nope, that was me being muted again. I need to like set that to sense when I'm talking instead of like a click button. Is everybody doing okay through this portion of it? I know there's a lot to play with in this section. All right. Everybody doing okay so far? Okay. So you guys feel free to keep moving along in the labs. I'm just going to do some quick demo and playing around in here while you guys are exploring. I know there's a lot in this section and we're down to about 45 minutes left and we got a little bit more to talk about. One thing of note, we did go ahead and extend the time on the lab environment. So your lab should not kick you out at 4. It should last until around 5 p.m. Eastern. So you'll have time after the fact to continue playing or poking prod at stuff maybe you wanted to put a little more attention to. But here we go. Let me share my screen. So here we go. The first chunk of this had you kind of looking at Atomic Red Team and what all they had going on. So I've been sitting here kind of playing around. It had you do the installation for Atomic Red Team on the host, which is quick and easy. This is one of those things to think about too, from the convenience versus realism. It's very convenient. You can drop it on the host and run all of the atomics from that host directly. But the problem is you're kind of lacking on the realism side here, right? You're not going to just bring everything on and do everything from that host. It doesn't take into account things like C2 and other factors. But once you do the install, it's super fast. I won't repeat those commands. You guys saw that. And then I did a quick list. Just show me all the atomics that it pulled down when it did the install to show how that works. And it gives us a quick general list of what they all are. If we wanted to dig a little deeper, I have an example of that down here. I ran the invoke atomics test command against T1218010. That's the test we ask you guys to run in the example in the lab. So it kicks back, tells us where the atomics are, and a quick general description of the atomic itself. So reg server 32 local com object scriptlet execution. If we wanted to actually execute this, we can just remove that show details brief piece. Let it go. It tells you once it's done, if it successfully completed that atomic, you should see calculator pop up. In this instance, mine did, so all is good there. And that's really just kind of showing you the convenience of atomic testing and what they are. So at a bare minimum, a really cool place to start. You should be able to hop in and run these atomic tests. The next portion of this was kind of talking about the actual Atomic Red Team page. So you can go through, look at the navigation, see everything they have put together. So if you were in here exploring and you were just curious about what atomics there are for each different phases, like let's say, I'll click into Discovery. Where's one that I like? I like local user discovery. Let's find that one. Let's go there. So 1087.001. Click on it. It gives you some quick descriptions from MITRE ATT&CK, what it looks like. And then it gives you the breakdowns of the atomic tests they have tied to this specific TTP. So for this example, we can see here it's saying we're enumerating all local accounts, and it's doing this by copying the etc password to another file. So obviously this works against Linux variants. If we were to do it against Windows, we can scroll down here, and it's going to have a bunch of different ways that it shows. But you can see it gives you all of the breakdowns, what they are, who they affect, and how to run them. The other nice thing about this here, if you didn't want to directly use the Atomic Red Team framework, install it and run it that way, you could come in here, look at these atomics on the page, and simply copy out the commands and run those commands in your environment. So just another potential option you have. But that's a quick general breakdown of atomics, what they are, and how they work. Is that anyone's first time ever playing with Atomic Red Team before? Was in this lab? Cool. So Ryan said, yep. What'd you guys think about it? Have any difficulties? Kind of make sense to you guys? real convenient to use. Who Andrew said, yeah, heard of, but we'll be playing some more. Second exercise timed out. Where is it's great, cool. Yeah, so that was atomics. The next portion of this, as we move through here, should have got you guys into testing with Empire and Starkiller. I'm a big fan of Empire and Starkiller and what they've built as a platform. It's a really cool free open source C2 framework. They do have a sponsored version where they put some nice, cool little features into it. But again, these guys have been maintaining the program and all of the functionality themselves. It's a small shop and they're doing awesome things. But let's look at it and play with it for a bit. If you clicked on the Starkiller shortcut here in your Chrome tab, it should have taken you directly into this page here. The default landing is on the listeners. For the sake of this lab and time, we weren't going to have you guys go through and install Empire and Starkiller and make sure everything worked. We did that for you and automated it. So all you should have to do is come in, click on the shortcut. But there are still some steps we need to do, right? We're getting into that convenience piece. When you think about it from free tooling, you still got to do a little bit of the extra work yourself. So the first thing we would do is set up our listeners. So we're going to create one, choose a type. In this instance, I'm just going to pick HTTP. We give it a name. You point it at the host you want it to be pointed at. In this instance, we're going to say 192.168.0.102. So this is who it's calling back to for the stager. This is the Slingshot server it's running from. It's not really anything on the back end you guys need to worry about, but for the lab, that's where it's going to. Then we need to tell it a port that the server is going to listen on. In this instance, it's going to be, I'll say 1335. Where is it binding? We say quad zeros. Just leave that default. Some of the other stuff you can do within here is change like how the launchers work, your default delays, jitters, so like how often it talks back to you, like traditional C2 heartbeat, that kind of a thing. You can change its time to live, how long it'll wait on things, how the headers look. It really gives you a chance to be a little more malleable with the way your C2 looks and try to match it to the overall threat profile you're trying to create. You can put some guardrails in it and you can change up the user agent and a bunch of other little things. For the sake of the lab, we're going to leave it all default. Once you've put in the basic information up here at the top, just hit submit. And I should have told you, hey, got a new listener started and it's enabled. So if I click back here on the listeners tab, I should now see it. They make it kind of simple to understand what's going on and what to see here. So we can tell a little green dot shows up. It's still active and running. Now that we have a listener, we need to create our stager. So we come down here. We've got a few that are already created. This is me playing around, but we'll walk through this process again real quick. I'm going to delete these real quick. Come in here, hit create. We're on a Windows host as our target. You're going to be running these against the Unicorn host itself. So let's go with Windows. I'm going to say command exec is the kind of stager I want. I'm going to call this lab stager. You need to choose the listener that you want it to connect to, which is the one we just created, our HTTP, and then you can pick a language of the stager to generate. For the lab, I'm going to pick PowerShell. It works with IronPython, C#, and I believe you can extend this functionality as well for different language styles for the stagers, but that takes a bit of manual work. This is a cool little function and feature they have built in here to where you can turn safe checks on or off. So it's going to look for if it's sandboxed or anything like that. If it is, it won't execute. It'll just kind of turn itself off and go away. If it doesn't find that sandbox, it'll go ahead and kick off. You can change the format that it generates the payload in, what kind of architecture it targets, and a bunch of other operational fields. You can even choose to turn on obfuscation if you wanted to. In the lab, we don't ask you to, but feel free to take a minute and play with the obfuscator and see how it generates and if it'll run. But now we've got a basic stager. I'm going to hit submit. It'll take its second, it'll spin, and then it'll tell me a new stager was created. Cool, stager's created. Now I come back here and validate. I see it's there. There's my lab stager. Which brings us to the last piece, agents. So what we need to do to make an agent appear, what this is basically the payload is executed on the victim. It's going to check back in. That check-in starts up what they call an agent, or the new victim host, like how it would normally check in on Cobalt Strike or Meterpreter when it opens a new session, things like that. Those are all the same thing, just different terminology. So this will pop up once we activate a payload, but we need to do that first, right? So for this stager, we can come down here to downloads. We should see we've got a new launcher that was just generated. And we can make sure, if we want to, we can do the direct download from here, or we can go down here to downloads and download it. But either way is fine. I'm just going to hit download real quick. It's going to tell you it's not sure about it. It's going to tell you it's dangerous. Just say it's fine. I want to keep it. Why did it not let me do it that time? I need to do it another way. Downloads. Okay, maybe I've got one in here already. Let's see why it did that. This happened to you guys in your lab too, where it blanked out and said you can't keep it, delete it? Cool. I'm glad someone said no, because this worked in testing last night and this morning, and now it's deciding, yeah, I'm not gonna let you do it this time. So it's just me. Cool. Well, let's try something else. I'll make a new one.
You try, if you just copy that URL, can you just do a wget and see if that'll download it?
You're saying this?
Yeah, if you right click on that, does it give you a link? Once the download is on there.
On the down arrow again.
No, it's not. And go stagers. It's not what I wanted you to do. All right, copy. Nope. Well, the demo guides had to hit me at some point today, right? Yeah, no, I got you, Elaine. I was doing that when I hit there. So if I do that, yay, let me go. Did it let me do it that time?
They keep changing that. Tell them to stop.
It said it did it, but I don't think it actually did it. Tried to make this easy. Let's see. Well, this is one thing. At least you know the browser is not going to allow it to happen. But all right, so I'm not going to waste any more of you guys' time trying to poke and prod at this and why Chrome's decided it doesn't like it all of a sudden. For most of you, I'm going to assume, unless you said otherwise, this worked for you in the lab environment. It should have allowed you to keep it. But we can move on from there. As you would have done this, you saw in the lab guide, we had the screenshots and pictures. It'll open up an agent. You can issue commands, play with modules, all that kind of fun stuff. Right now, mine's not wanting to cooperate. The last piece of this chunk of the lab would have taken you into SCYTHE. This is the piece I really wanted to spend a little bit of time talking over with you guys and showing you. We've got the platform set up for you already. You don't have to do any of the install, any of that kind of creation. But we've made it pretty simple to show what's going on here. In the threat manager, you can see all of the different threats that we have in the catalog that are loaded for you. You can scroll through them and pick one up. You can read at it, try and make whatever you want to make. The other route to go about this from the dashboard here is creating our own campaign. So we had you guys create a test campaign. So we add descriptions, all of that fun stuff. You can choose the way you want your C2 communications to work. By default, we're supporting DNS, HTTP or HTTPS, SMB, and steganography. For the lab, we're just using HTTPS. You can select customizations and guardrails you can put in place, like we saw in PowerShell Empire as well. So if you wanted to restrict your campaign to only work in a specific domain environment or on a specific device name, you can do that. You can set it to a specific date range. And the other cool piece here, when we think about customizations, I wanted to show off for a second, is the auto pause feature here. So most campaigns, if you're not manually executing commands, you don't really have control of the timing. With Scythe, we've made campaign execution automated. So if you wanted the whole campaign to run and then you retroactively hunt, you can do that. Or you can turn this play pause feature on by clicking the yes, and it'll pause after every step to give you that semi-manual control. You don't have to run the commands. You don't have to do the procedures or behaviors. Scythe will take care of that for you, but you get to choose when they execute with the play pause function. So this is really cool in a purple team exercise where you can turn around and say, hey, we just did behavior X, Y, and Z. Did you guys get any alerts? This might be what you want to look for. Did something else happen? And really kind of control the flow of the exercise. Let them get their chance to respond and hunt and validate before you execute the next set of behaviors. Because you don't want your team to kind of get overloaded and flooded and maybe start chasing down other things when they haven't completed their process yet on the first set of behaviors, if that makes sense. So we can do the auto pause features, set our guardrails, decide the retry failure you want to happen. So with these steps being automated, you can choose to either, if a step fails, what you want it to do. If it fails, in this instance, we just say continue to next step. But if you wanted it to pause at that point, if anything fails, you can say, go ahead and mark it as a failure. This didn't happen. The campaign closes itself automatically. Or you can have it keep retrying that failed step until it gets a success or reaches a timeout limit. So that's a cool way of doing that. And the next piece down here is controlling the actual parameters of the C2, what you want it to look like. So you can tell it where to look, where it's being listening to, if you wanted it set secure or not, so HTTP versus HTTPS. You can choose how big you want the packet sizes to be, how you want the header to look, jitter and heartbeat, all of that kind of fun stuff. There's a lot you can do with this. It's very flexible. I like adding the heartbeat one in here to speed it up a bit for demonstration, so we're not waiting 5 seconds between commands. So a good way of doing that, you can click heartbeat and just type the number, it'll set it for you. Or you could just manually type it in, either way is acceptable. From here, you can come down here and we've got a little bit of that signature avoidance obfuscation set for you as well. You can change the database path for what you're building, and you can change the timestamps so it doesn't look like something fresh. By default, I believe this button will generate something max 2 years backwards, but you could manually insert what you want the timestamp to look like too. So let's say you're in the engagement, you're on the host, and you can see a lot of the system timestamps for those files might be set to a certain date. In order to make your stuff blend in a little more and make that hunting process slightly harder, you could set the compilation timestamp of your payload to match the system time on host. And now it's a little more like you're blending in. So now that we've got those basics set, come over here, hit next. And now we have the fun part. We've got options here. We've got really like 5 different ways you can build your test. The first one would be utilizing some pre-built techniques that we've got set, or the atomics that you guys played with earlier. We have those in there in this cool chart. Within this, as you come over here, you can select the one you want to play with. Let's find the local device or local user discovery again. So say 1087.1 local accounts, and it gives you the options. As you see these little checks here, that'll tell you whether they're from an atomic red team check or if it's something we've pre-built. All you've got to do is click on it, hit configure, and it's going to give you a quick step warning basically. If there's anything that needs configured afterwards, like maybe there's variables that need set or IP addresses, specified usernames, things like that, it'll ask you for those and it'll tell you that it's going to add those pre-configuration steps in to your campaign builder on Scythe. So from here we can hit add steps, and then we can see it dumped all of the atomic red team test commands in here for us for local user account 1087 discovery. Does it several different ways. So we can do that to use the atomics. We can use the existing threats we have in the threat library. So let's pick one you guys ran. I believe APT41 was one of the ones from the lab. So you could select this. And I would urge you guys, if you've pre-built or if you went through and followed the steps and did your own customizations for these, take a look and see what your CTI and your plan looks like compared to what we have built. Is there a difference? Things like that. But as we come through here, you can see it took the entire plan and put it in your campaign builder for you. And it's giving you information as you need it too. So there's different notes and steps as we go through this. It's all tagged already based off of MITRE. It's nothing you need to do. It's also tagged if there's corresponding signal rules in our newer stuff. And we've made it really easy so you can see what they correspond to. Let me come down here. Sorry if my screen looks a little scrunched. It's the VLP having fun. I go back one, next. Either way, I'll create this campaign. So let's say we want to run with that with APT41. We'll create this campaign real fast. Now we can see back here on our dashboard, we've got a new pending campaign. We have several different ways now that you can pull this payload down. First one being you can select that campaign you wanted to start, hit this download button, and choose the format you want it in. I'm going to go with, let's say, for the sake of the demo, the executable. Hit download client. Let's see if it actually does it this time. There. So now you can see it's behaving for me for this one. So now we've got our quick little payload. We can hit it, run it. And as it runs, we'll see this pending turn to active and we'll get a new check in. Boom. So now what's nice is we can watch as it goes through and starts running the campaign. It's going to tell us the actions it took, the response it got back, and whether it succeeded or failed. And you can check and see everything that happened and any associated tags that come with that specific behavior. So this will run through and do its whole process. And as you can see here, I'm not typing, clicking, doing anything crazy. It's just going to run on its own. The other interesting thing you can do here, let's say you want to manually insert yourself into this process and issue some commands. We've got this feature up here for the shell. So you can click that. It's going to sync with the victim device you're currently executing on. And you can execute commands. So the help function is there to tell you everything that you could potentially work with modules, things like that. Command list loaded tells you all the current modules loaded in your campaign. So let's say I want to use run and just issue the who am I command real quick. Do that, hit enter, takes it a second. It'll issue the command, the client does it, then it returns the results. What's really nice about this, you get the results live in the shell for you in case you want to continue using it or continue working in the shell. Or you can close out here and depending on how many it's ran since I was executing, it manually tagged. I'm going to lose it in the execution. There we go. The command that I ran. So there's a bunch of different ways you can interact with the SCYTHE platform and run these campaigns and execute a purple team exercise. Is this kind of making sense how this all works together now from a holistic purple perspective, guys? Cool. Well, all right, I'm pretty much demoed everything through that section. I know we're getting close on time, so I am going to stop sharing so we can get back into this and let Tyler talk about some of the blue side of this and let you guys do some blue hunting, detection engineering and stuff in the lab for a bit.
Yep.
Again, we extended your guys' time, so you're not going to be restricted by the next 15 minutes. You're going to have another hour or so after the webcast ends to play.
Yes, but that being said, I'm going to try to do this part fast. I think probably after this, I'll just demo the bit of this. We can wrap up all of the content we were going to talk about, and then you guys can go into the labs think, like Trey said, we added quite a bit of this. We should have added a little bit more time. But he was saying we're going to get into the hunt and detect part, the thing that I love, the blue team side, the detection side, the other half of the purple. So for that, we're going to talk about the detection engineering process. So the detection engineering process is comprised of 4 main phases: direction, collection, processing, and dissemination. Oh, sorry about that. So direction is when CTI provides threats for our detection capabilities to focus on. You might have multiple teams who provide this direction, including an intel team, a DFIR, a red team. Could be you just going on Twitter and seeing the new hotness, and you're like, hey, I want to test against this and see if we can, if we're able to see it or not. Then that feeds into collection. So for that, we need to know what a threat will look like in the environment. We need to emulate the threat, with the end goal being to generate and collect logs for what the threat will look like inside of our security stack. And then from there, if we're able to identify any gaps, we'll be able to fix them or document them, or come up with a plan down the road to close that gap. So collection is really important. Then it's going to take us into processing. So that's where we're actually going to hunt through the logs for detection opportunities. At first, we're going to cast a wide net, because you don't want to miss anything. You want to cast a wide net, and then as you go in and hunt and you identify, known good, you identify good images or things that you consistently see that are good, you'll be able to narrow that process down smaller and smaller and make that net smaller, while still being able to see the bad guy with minimal benign events. Well, I'll talk more about that here in a second. And then dissemination is just when we give the stakeholders our deliverables. So for the SOC, you might have to give the SOC an alert with some context, some reasoning, maybe a snort rule or sigma rule or something like that. For management or the CTI team, they might want to record the content or the thread itself to see what MITRE ATT&CK IDs are covered and what log sources were used. And then you might want to give it to the red team itself and be like, hey, we saw this. Maybe you could try to find a different way, a new way to bypass the alert, which will then kickstart back to the direction and then re-kick off a new purple team process or detection engineering process. So the point of that is, like, these can come from anywhere. You don't have to be a detection engineer or even in the detection or blue cell to come up with ideas for things to hunt on, right? So that brings us into collection. So like I said, in the collection phase, we're going to verify that the data was collected, identify where the logs are. We are going to identify any gaps in our logs or visibility, so that way we can go in and shore those up for the next time. And then I'm sure you guys have heard the phrase "PIX or it didn't happen." For detection engineering, it's logs or it didn't happen. So you can't detect what isn't being logged. You can make assumptions and kind of you can make assumptions of what you thought might have happened, like when you're trying to make the holistic kill chain, but you can't definitively say what did or didn't happen if it's not recorded in the logs. So we need to make sure that we're logging appropriately, which is a big point of the purple team engagements, is to make sure that those actions exist in those logs. You can't log everything because it's just too much. It's too much stuff. It's I've been on engagements at the IAP level hunting for the bad guy, and it's billions of logs, it's terabytes of logs. You can't look through all that. So this purple team collection, detection engineering collection part is really so you can focus on what's important, what you need. Like process creation is probably important. Successful or unsuccessful logon is important. Images being loaded, DLLs, things like that. So that's the point, is you want to make sure that you have enough. You don't want too much, and a lot of that is just testing and going back and forth. Sorry about that. So then collection. So what logs? So from this part, from the data source component, you need to focus on what logs do you need to create the alert. At a base level, most of your detections can be written with the Windows security log, which is native, or sysmon, which you have to install and configure. But in those, you'll be able to see process creation, user logon, file creation, registry modification, network connections, things like that. So those are two really good free natively Microsoft signed tools that you're able to utilize to start your log collection or log generation if you don't have it. Obviously, those are native to Windows. Sysmon does exist on Linux. It's new, so it's got a little bit of hiccups, but it's got a lot of good stuff that's being recorded in that. And then you can use the detection section on the MITRE ATT&CK pages to go through behaviors of the threat groups, kind of like what we talked about before. Is just another example of how you can go through it to find detections. So as they had the CTI for the threat emulation, they also have a detections section on there, which will help you to identify different things per actor. And then just another deep dive into the collection, just another screenshot of the MITRE ATT&CK detections that they provide. Data sources, it breaks down techniques and tactics, how to identify them, what the event IDs are, things like that. So in this example, it has a T1548, which is abuse elevation control mechanism, which is when a process attempts to elevate to system level permissions, and they have an analytic to help you in your detection efforts. So definitely go ahead and check that out. All right, so to get a little more into the weeds here, this is how you would map your data source to your logs in your environment. So in this, we can see that a process creation event will create a log entry with the event ID of 4688 in the Windows security event log. 4688 will also show us what user created a process or what user executed a command, as well as some of the metadata about the process itself. So using this kind of map where we map like actions to event IDs, we can map out what coverage we have for different behaviors. And of course, this goes beyond just the security event logs. It can be replicated over Sysmon or whatever EDR you have. And using kind of a flow chart like this will help you to have the maximum amount of coverage without having too many logs. So if you know that one log records process creation, you don't need another log that also records process creation if it's showing the same thing. So just kind of like the best way to have the most visibility with the minimal amount of overlap. This leads us into processing. So that's when we go in and we start to think about the detection opportunities that exist. So in this part, we'll test our hypothesis by starting with a broad search, right? That wide net. And then as we go through and find false positives or known goods or things like that, we can kind of tighten up or narrow that search to have a better detection, which ideally will look like this. So we want to capture mostly the malicious events. So we see in there, I don't know, let's say that there's 10 malicious events. We're missing 1.5 of them, and we have 2 of the benign events associated with it. That's okay. You know, detection engineering is less of a science and more of an art of sorts, where you have to, based off your risk appetite and the logs you have available, make concessions where you can to be able to hunt on it. So ideally, you wanted something like this. It's okay to have 1 or 2 events in there that are benign or fine or known good, but this still captures most of the malicious events and a few of the benign events where you could then establish a hunt plan or something like that to go in and find the rest of those malicious events, especially if they're all tied together. Once you have a chunk of it, you'll be able to go in and get more fidelity on those alerts. This takes us to dissemination. So again, you need a report, you need something to give to somebody so that it's actionable, right? You don't want to exist in a silo and just keep all this information all to yourself. So the SOC, they might want an alert or a snort rule or something like that. The intelligence cell or management might want to know what logs the information was available in, where the gaps in coverage are, things like that. And the red team, you could give them the same alert as the SOC, and they could try to come up with some bypasses for it, try to find a new way to get in, and then kick off the detection engineering process again. So for a structure for dissemination, if you don't already have one or a template, we recommend Palantir's alerting and detection strategy framework. It's a great starting point, covers a lot. It's really useful. It's got templates in there, so definitely check that out. And then so that takes us kind of into, well, how do you give detections to someone? So we like to utilize Sigma for that. It's an open source structure that is designed to write detections. Sigma HQ is the proprietor, I guess you could call them, inventor, owner, whichever of those works, of the Sigma rules. And on their HQ, they host a ton of rules. It's free. You can go in there. It's easy to search, and you're able to take the Sigma rule, put it into a translator, and then output it in whatever seam you utilize, such as Elastic or Splunk, ArcSight, and other EDRs as well. So an example of it, this is from the Sigma HQ page. This is what it looks like on GitHub. See, there's a search feature up there on the top. So if you're looking for a specific rule, like this one's looking for 7-zip, you can just type it in. The rules will pop up. It's very easy to navigate. This is an example of a Sigma rule. So in this, it's a PowerShell invoke web request that is going in there, and it's looking for, it will hit if the command line contains either invoke web request or IWR, and then also contains either HTTP outfile or DLL in the command line. And in the lab, we'll get into how to translate these and get it to show. I just want to make sure that we get through all this before anybody else has to leave. So this is just an up close view of a Sigma rule. It's kind of hard to see in this in the screenshot, so I just took it and put it in this slide. This one goes for detecting 7-zip compressing a file with a password. You can see that it has tags in there, so it's associated with the collection, and then tag T1560001. It's for Windows. It's if a process is created, and then you can take that rule and go to uncoder. You're going to paste that Sigma rule on the left here. And then from that drop down where it says Splunk query up there, you're going to click that, drop down to whatever seam you're using. In our lab, we're going to use Splunk, and then hit translate, and it'll automatically translate that rule for you. Of course, nothing is 100% perfect. You can see in here that there's no index, so you need an index to hunt in your seam, as well as there's some kind of name change going on now where image, it's translating to process_name and not image, so you have to go in and change that. And then sometimes the sources are a little wonky. So I like to do what it has here, where it says source equals win event log : star. So that'll capture security logs, sysmon logs, application logs, service logs, things like that. So depending on your environment, it might be a little bit different, but it's a pretty close way. It's the closest way that I've seen to quickly write a rule in an open format, translate it, and just give it to somebody else. And then here, we took that translated query, threw it in Splunk. You could see that I set the index as main, ran the search, and those are our results. Boom, detected, we did it. So all of that very quickly was to go through and get us to the lab. I think for this, just for the sake of time, because you guys, like I said, we'll have extra time after we're done talking. I'll just quickly show you what it looks like in the lab, maybe. If my enrollments. Sorry about that, mine timed out just like Trey's did. Should just take a second, and I have the logs already up. Control-Alt-Delete. Unicorn. So this was, I ran the APT 41 threat, similar to how Trey did. And then inside of Splunk, if you've never been in Splunk, the front page will look like this. You just go to search and reporting, and then we're in the same spot. That's it, just a few clicks. So in there, the rules are here in the manual, the Sigma rules. It's a little difficult with the copying and paste inside of VLP, another VLP-ism. So what I would do is you can look at the rule. The previous one has the GitHub link. You open it on the browser that you're in, and then go to Uncoder. The copy and paste makes a lot more sense. The Sigma rules are written in YAML, so they're very particular on spaces and tabs and things like that. So if it doesn't copy exactly right, it's not going to work. So I just included the search query for it down there at the bottom for you guys. But yeah, if you're going to do it, if you want to translate it, I would just open a new tab and do it that way on your own. But you can see in here that we're looking for the net command being ran in either user or ads. We're looking for a new user being created via net, which is this Sigma rule here. Translated it in Uncoder, pasted it, and boom, we can see that APT 41 SCYTHE client is the parent image that then spawns net, which then goes in and creates that user, and then you see how this image is net, this and this are the same. So it's showing two different ways that it logged that event happening. And then the other one that it has us do is go in. This is a really interesting rule I wrote not too long ago, which goes in looking for suspicious archive creation. So it's basically if you're hunting for if an archive was created not by 7-zip or Explorer. I think I updated it to include like WinRAR and other like typical forms that you would expect to see. Most people make zip files by opening File Explorer, right-clicking, send to compressed zip folders. That's making it through Explorer. So if it does it in a non-normal way, then this will detect that. We have here, I just tabled out the time, parent image, file name, command line, and parent command line. Those are kind of my go-tos for host logs. So we can see that this service login.exe, which is the SCYTHE executable that was downloaded, goes in, opens up PowerShell, and then actually launches the service logon.exe, which then in the command line goes in and using PowerShell goes in and creates this exfil.zip file. So it was made through PowerShell, not through 7-zip, not through Explorer. So very, very odd for that to happen in most enterprise environments. Most people aren't doing that, or if they are, it's probably just an administrator. So it's easily, you could just call them up, be like, hey, did you do this? You could table out the username on here. Let me put it in the beginning. Ooh. You can see the user unicorn. These not translated ones means that it wasn't run from a user account. It's probably run by system, which is even more strange, probably. So that's just a quick down and dirty of how to go in, take the Sigma rules, translate them, hunt in the seam, and find the bad guy. And then you guys will get lap time for that. Trey, do you want to do the last section, and then we can leave them to the labs on their own?
Yeah, let's see where did my window go? What we got left? So operationalize purple.
Should just be the operationalized purple.
Yep, feel free to keep on plugging away at that lab if you guys want. I will talk for a few extra minutes past 4 o'clock, and then we will let you guys be. No, this one ran over. This is our first time running it in this full format, so we thought it would fit in 3 hours, but it turns out it might need to be 4.
Yeah, trying to break up the stuff. Oh, I'm not going to talk. You go ahead.
Yeah, so bringing that all together takes us to here to operationalize purple team. What does it look like? Blending blue and red, everything we've talked about, everything you guys have done today in the lab falls really into this continuous cycle circle. You determine your threat or some new CTI pops up. We decide to analyze that, organize it into something usable, discuss it as an organization. Is this something we think we can detect or respond to? What's the expected responses? Then emulate it. Once you've went through, you've emulated it, you've got an understanding of what's going to happen there. Bring it into the detection engineering side of the house. Did we alert? Did we respond? Can we see it? If not, how can we change that? Make your changes, then wash, rinse, repeat, and keep going and improving your security posture continuously. That is realistically purple teaming in a nice little box. This is everything that we have covered as we went through it. Some of the key things, the takeaways here, the debriefing and improving metrics, right? The organization needs to get some kind of benefit out of this. We're not just doing this because we feel like it. Documenting everything is key. Showing how you're providing value. Are you validating security controls, your logging capabilities? Are you implementing new controls and capabilities? Are you determining what your visibility, coverage, and gaps are? You're able to show and validate how your blue team operates, the way your processes and procedures work, all of that kind of stuff. It's a continuous process, and the end goal here is just trying to bolster your defenses. So metrics, some of the things you could be documenting and responding, or not responding to, but making sure that you can show that proof of that validation is, so the differences between time that something was alerted, detected, or logged. These things will real-time show gaps. So if you had some kind of execution method, if it was logged now you can measure, okay, from the time it executed to a log being generated on host, how long did it take that log to get to whatever our platform is that we use for alerts or into our SIEM for correlation? Being able to recognize that, see there's an issue, and tune and train those issues, you can lower that time, that mean time to detection and alerting, and get faster as an organization from the defensive perspective. Some simple tips, things that we've put out there for you guys. Start simple. It's its own process. It's going to need to mature over time. Don't think you need to be a rock star overnight. And it's okay to be creative, to deviate from that plan to accomplish the overall objective as long as everybody's okay with it. Mind you, you're staying within scope. MITRE ATT&CK itself, this is not a bingo card. You're not just trying to check all of the boxes and make sure you can detect the things. The behaviors you're doing will change and grow over time, so you need to be able to grow with it. Make sure you document the goods and the bads. You've got to highlight wins from the red side and the blue side. If the blue stopped a payload you did or detected a behavior, cool, celebrate that with them. On the flip side, you as a team, if you're the red team guy like I am, and something gets through that you thought they were going to detect, still celebrate that. That shows a problem for them, but that's still a win because you illuminated it. Now they know it's there. Now it's something you can fix. It's a gap you can control, if that makes sense. Probably last thing I will say here, the rest of these resources will be available for you guys in the slides after the fact. We're running these kind of training workshops, Threat Thursday live events every month. If you liked this format, if you want to get a chance to play with the platform again, see what we're doing, or just attend some more training, go check out scythe.io/workshops and see what we have coming up for you. We just finally finalized our schedule out through the end of August, I want to say. So we've got some really cool new workshops coming out. And our Threat Thursday live events happen every Thursday. I believe the next one is tomorrow.
It's tomorrow.
Yep. And those are really cool. We show off a new threat or maybe a specific behavior. We've got talks, I believe, was it last month? Jake Williams was on with us. We talked through something really cool we built for the cloud. And it's just always fun. It's quick. It's 20 minutes. Come check it out. From that, I will stop sharing my slides. That way you guys don't have to listen to me ramble and you can continue playing through the detection side of the lab for the next hour or so. Are there any questions or concerns that came up on your guys' end? Thanks, Eric. We appreciate kind words. And as always, you guys, if you have any questions or concerns, or you're just curious about something, feel free to reach out to us, whether that's through social media or through the SCYTHE contact channels. We're really responsive and we like interacting with you guys. So note to self, next time, 4 hours, not 3. I think 4 might have been the sweet spot.
Yeah, I think breaking up us talking with the labs is great, but we definitely did not anticipate the time difference for that. That's all right. We got through almost everything. The labs are extended, and then if anybody needs anything, we're always available.